I was a barista fired for being rude until I proved they were money laundering. And the moment Marcus Kellerman pointed his manicured finger at the exit door, his smug smile stretching across his artificially tanned face, I knew this wasn't over. The morning had started like any other at Grind Coffee House, steam rising from the espresso machine, the familiar weight of the metal tamper in my hand. I'd been working there for 2 years, pulling perfect shots, memorizing regulars' orders, maintaining the kind of consistency that kept customers coming back. My technique was flawless. 15 grams of freshly ground beans, tamped with exactly 30 pounds of pressure, extracted in 25 seconds. The math of coffee was something I understood, something I could control. But control was slipping away as I watched Marcus stride through the front door at exactly 9:47 a.m., his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished concrete floor. He never came in this early. The regional manager usually made his appearances during the lunch rush, clipboard in hand, counting register transactions and timing our service speeds with the cold precision of a factory supervisor. His eyes locked onto mine immediately, and I felt the shift in the air. The other staff sensed it too. Jenny's hand froze mid-wipe on the counter, and David's conversation with the regular at table 4 trailed off into uncomfortable silence. Marcus had that effect on people, his presence sucking the warmth from any room he entered. He approached the counter with deliberate steps, each one calculated to maximize the tension building around him. I continued working, finishing the cappuccino for the woman in the navy blazer, my hands steady despite the growing knot in my stomach. The foam art came out perfect, a delicate Rosetta pattern that would have impressed any coffee snob. Small victories. Marcus positioned himself directly across from me, his pale blue eyes scanning my every movement. He pulled out his phone, swiped the screen, and held it up so I could see the display. A screenshot of a Google review, 1 star, dated 3 days ago. The customer complained about rude service, claiming the barista had an attitude problem and made them feel unwelcome. I remembered the interaction clearly. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit had ordered a venti caramel macchiato, extra hot, extra caramel, with oat milk. When I explained that we were out of oat milk and offered alternatives, he'd raised his voice, demanding to speak to a manager. I'd remained calm, professional, offering to remake his drink with almond milk at no charge. He'd stormed out, muttering about finding a real coffee shop. Marcus set his phone down on the counter with a sharp tap, the sound cutting through the ambient coffee shop noise. His expression was stone-cold serious, the kind of look that preceded life-altering announcements. He gestured toward the back office with a slight nod, a summons I couldn't ignore. The walk to the office felt longer than usual, past the display case filled with overpriced pastries, past the community board covered in local event flyers, past the corner table where 2 college students typed frantically on their laptops. Each step brought me closer to whatever judgment Marcus had already reached. The office was cramped, barely large enough for 2 people. Marcus closed the door behind us with a soft click that somehow sounded final. He moved around to the other side of the small desk, putting a barrier between us, claiming the position of authority. I remained standing, my hands clasped behind my back, waiting for whatever speech he'd rehearsed. Marcus opened a manila folder and pulled out several printed pages. More reviews, I realized, as he spread them across the desk like evidence in a criminal trial. His finger traced each complaint: attitude problems, poor customer service, making customers feel rushed. Most were vague, the kind of generic complaints that could apply to any service interaction gone wrong. But then he pulled out something else. A written statement from Jennifer Morrison, the assistant manager who worked weekday mornings. My stomach dropped as I recognized her handwriting, neat and precise, documenting alleged incidents of insubordination and customer conflicts. Incidents that had been blown completely out of proportion or taken out of context. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his fingertips pressed together in a pyramid, studying my reaction. The silence stretched between us, heavy and oppressive. He was enjoying this moment, savoring the power he held over my livelihood. I could see it in the slight upturn of his lips, the way his shoulders relaxed as he watched me squirm. When he finally spoke, his words were measured and rehearsed. Company policy regarding customer service standards. Multiple complaints creating a pattern of behavior. The need to maintain Grind Coffee House's reputation in the community. All corporate speak designed to create legal distance between his personal decision and company liability. The termination was effective immediately. He slid a final document across the desk. My final paycheck, minus deductions, along with information about COBRA health insurance continuation. The bureaucratic efficiency of it all was breathtaking. 2 years of consistent work reduced to a stack of papers and a direct deposit that would hit my account by Friday. Marcus stood and extended his hand, a gesture that was meant to appear professional but felt like mockery. I looked at his outstretched palm, soft, uncalloused, the hand of someone who'd never worked a service job in his life, someone who'd never felt the sting of hot steam on their forearms or the ache of standing on their feet for 8 hours straight. I didn't shake his hand. Instead, I gathered my things from my locker, an extra apron, a worn paperback book, a travel mug that had seen better days. The personal items that had made this place feel somewhat like home for the past 2 years. Jenny watched from behind the counter, her expression a mixture of sympathy and fear. She knew she could be next if she stepped out of line. Marcus escorted me to the front door, his presence ensuring I wouldn't cause a scene or say anything that might disrupt the carefully maintained atmosphere of the coffee shop. The other customers barely looked up from their phones and laptops, oblivious to the small human drama playing out around them. The morning air hit my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk, the familiar sounds of traffic and distant construction creating a soundtrack to my sudden unemployment. I turned back to look through the large windows of Grind Coffee House, watching Marcus return to his inspection routine, checking inventory levels and reviewing sales reports as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something that would prove to be Marcus Kellerman's first and most critical mistake. Because what Marcus didn't know, what his corporate arrogance had blinded him to, was that I noticed things. Details that others overlooked. Patterns that didn't quite make sense. And over the past 2 years, I'd noticed quite a few interesting patterns at Grind Coffee House. The cash deposits that never seemed to match the daily sales figures. The regular customers who always paid with crisp $100 bills for simple coffee orders. The way Jennifer Morrison's eyes would dart toward the back office whenever certain people entered the store. The weekly visits from Tony Marcelli, who claimed to be a coffee bean supplier, but never seemed to actually deliver any beans. I walked home slowly, my mind already shifting from the sting of termination to something more calculating, more purposeful. Marcus had made the mistake of assuming I was just another expendable employee, someone who would slink away quietly and find another minimum wage job. He had no idea that he'd just declared war on someone who had both the time and the motivation to fight back. My apartment was a modest 1-bedroom in a converted warehouse. Nothing fancy, but private enough for what I was beginning to plan. I made myself a cup of coffee, good coffee, better than anything Grind served, and sat at my small kitchen table with a legal pad and pen. The first step was documentation. Everything I could remember about the unusual activity I'd observed at the coffee shop. Names, dates, amounts, behavioral patterns. The information poured out of me. 2 years of subconscious observation suddenly crystallizing into a coherent picture. Tony Marcelli visited every Tuesday at 2:30 p.m., always carrying a black leather messenger bag. He would spend exactly 15 minutes in the back office with Jennifer Morrison, sometimes with Marcus if he happened to be there. He never left with coffee, but he always left without the messenger bag. 20 minutes later, Jennifer would make a cash deposit at the bank across the street. Deposits that were always significantly larger than our actual daily sales would justify. The regular customers with their $100 bills were equally suspicious. Mrs. Chen, who claimed to be retired but drove a different luxury car each week. The college-age kid named Danny who paid for a $2 coffee with a $100 bill and never wanted change, telling us to keep it as a tip. The businessman in the gray suit who came in every Friday, ordered a black coffee, and left a $100 bill on the counter while talking on his phone in rapid Italian. I spent 3 hours filling pages with observations, cross-referencing them with my own memory of when these events occurred. The pattern was clear once I laid it out properly. Grind Coffee House wasn't just serving coffee, it was serving as a front for money laundering operations. The beauty of it was elegant in its simplicity. A cash-heavy business like a coffee shop was perfect for washing dirty money. Large cash deposits wouldn't raise immediate suspicion, especially if the book showed inflated sales figures to match. The regular cast of characters were likely low-level players in whatever criminal organization was using Marcus's coffee shop as their personal ATM. But knowing was only half the battle. I needed proof, documentation that would stand up to scrutiny from law enforcement agencies. And more importantly, I needed to time everything perfectly to maximize the impact on Marcus Kellerman personally. The next morning, I positioned myself across the street from Grind Coffee House, armed with a telephoto lens and a notebook. I'd borrowed the camera from my neighbor Jake, claiming I was taking up photography as a new hobby. He was happy to help, probably feeling sorry for my sudden unemployment situation. From my vantage point in the window of the used bookstore across the street, I had a clear view of the coffee shop's entrance and the bank next door. I watched Jennifer Morrison's routine, timing her movements, documenting the flow of customers, and paying special attention to anyone who deviated from normal coffee shop behavior. Tuesday arrived right on schedule. At 2:25 p.m., Tony Marcelli's black BMW pulled up to the curb outside Grind Coffee House. I adjusted the telephoto lens and began shooting, capturing clear images of his face, his license plate, and the black messenger bag that he carried into the shop. 15 minutes later, he emerged empty-handed. I kept shooting as he got back into his BMW and drove away. 23 minutes after that, Jennifer Morrison walked out of the coffee shop carrying a bank deposit bag. I followed her progress across the street, documenting her entry into the bank and the timestamp on my camera, showing exactly when the deposit was made. But photographs weren't enough. I needed financial records, transaction histories, something that would definitively prove the money laundering operation, which meant I needed to get back inside Grind Coffee House after hours. The coffee shop used an old-fashioned security system, the kind with a numeric keypad near the back entrance. I'd watched Jennifer and Marcus arm and disarm it dozens of times over the past 2 years, their fingers unconsciously tracing the same pattern each time. Muscle memory was a beautiful thing, especially when people weren't aware they were being observed. The code was Jennifer's birthday, January 2nd, 2017, followed by the pound sign. Simple, predictable, and exactly the kind of security oversight that came from overconfidence. Thursday night, I waited until well past midnight before making my move. The industrial district where Grind Coffee House was located was deserted at that hour, nothing but empty parking lots and darkened storefronts. I approached from the alley behind the building, where shadows provided cover and no streetlights would betray my presence. The back door was solid steel, but the security system was mounted to the wall beside it. I pulled out my phone and used its flashlight function to illuminate the keypad, careful to shield the light from any potential observers. My fingers hesitated for just a moment before pressing the numbers. 1027 hash. The system beeped twice and the red light turned green. I was inside. The coffee shop felt different in the darkness. Familiar equipment transformed into strange silhouettes. I made my way carefully toward the back office, using my phone's flashlight sparingly to avoid drawing attention from anyone who might be passing by outside. The office door was unlocked, another security oversight that spoke to Marcus's arrogance. Inside, I found exactly what I was looking for: a filing cabinet with financial records, deposit slips, and transaction logs that told the story of systematic money laundering over the past 18 months. I pulled out my phone and began photographing everything. Bank statements showing deposits that far exceeded what any coffee shop should generate. Handwritten logs in Jennifer Morrison's neat penmanship tracking payments from various individuals, with codes instead of names. Receipt books with pages torn out, creating gaps in the official record while ghost transactions continued in the shadows. But the real prize was Marcus Kellerman's personal ledger, a bound notebook hidden behind the filing cabinet. His own handwriting detailed the operation in damning clarity: percentages, payment schedules, and most importantly, names. Tony Marcelli was just one player in a larger network that included city council members, construction company owners, and several people whose names I recognized from local newspaper coverage of organized crime investigations. I photographed every page, every receipt, every piece of evidence that would paint a complete picture of the money laundering scheme. The coffee shop was generating fake sales of nearly $50,000 per month, washing money for what appeared to be a significant criminal operation with connections throughout the city. As I worked copying everything methodically, a cold satisfaction settled over me. Marcus had fired me for being rude to customers, but he was personally profiting from criminal activity. The irony was beautiful in its simplicity. My phone buzzed with a text message, startling me in the quiet office. A friend asking about weekend plans, completely innocent, but a reminder that I was operating on borrowed time. I finished photographing the last of the records and prepared to leave. But as I reached for the office door, I heard something that froze my blood. The sound of keys jingling outside the front entrance. Someone was coming. I switched off my phone's flashlight and pressed myself against the office wall, straining to hear over the sound of my own heartbeat. The front door opened and closed, followed by footsteps on the concrete floor. Heavy steps, deliberate and confident. Someone who belonged here. A light switched on in the main area, bright enough to cast shadows under the office door. I heard movement around the coffee shop, the sound of papers rustling and cabinet doors opening and closing. Whoever had arrived was looking for something specific. The footsteps approached the back area, getting closer to my hiding spot. I weighed my options. Try to slip out the back door and risk being seen, or wait it out and hope whoever was here would finish their business and leave quickly. The decision was made for me when I heard Marcus Kellerman's voice, low and tense, apparently talking on his phone. He was less than 10 feet away from the office, moving around the preparation area behind the counter. His words were muffled but urgent, discussing numbers and percentages, and someone named Vincent who was apparently unhappy about something. I pressed my ear closer to the door, trying to catch more details when I heard him mention my name. He was explaining my termination to whoever was on the other end of the call, describing me as a potential security risk who had been asking too many questions about the business operations. The person on the phone must have asked about loose ends because Marcus assured them that I was just a disgruntled employee who would find another job and forget about Grind Coffee House. How wrong he was about that. Marcus finished his call and spent another 10 minutes in the main area, the sound suggesting he was retrieving or depositing something in the same hiding places I just finished photographing. When I finally heard the front door close and the security system rearm itself, I waited another 20 minutes before moving. Getting out was easier than getting in had been. I slipped through the back door, reset the alarm system, and disappeared into the shadows of the alley. But now I had something far more valuable than just photographs of financial records. I had heard Marcus personally discussing the criminal operation, confirming my suspicions and adding another layer to the case I was building against him. Over the next 3 days, I worked like a man possessed, organizing the evidence into a comprehensive package that would be impossible to ignore or dismiss. Bank statements cross-referenced with the fake sales records. Photographs of the regular money laundering customers matched with their license plate numbers and names from Marcus's personal ledger. A timeline of deposits and suspicious activities that painted a clear picture of systematic criminal enterprise. But I wasn't ready to turn everything over to the authorities just yet. First, I wanted Marcus Kellerman to understand exactly what he was facing. I wanted him to feel the same helplessness I'd felt when he pointed toward that exit door and terminated my employment with his smug smile. I crafted an email that was both professional and menacing in its implications. No threats, no emotional language, just a clear statement of facts and a timeline for response. I attached selected photographs of the financial records, enough to demonstrate that I had access to everything, but not so much that he could determine the full extent of my evidence. The subject line was simple: regarding irregularities in Grind Coffee House financial records. The body of the email was equally straightforward. I identified myself, referenced my recent termination, and explained that during my employment, I had observed concerning discrepancies between reported sales figures and actual cash handling procedures. I suggested that an immediate internal audit would be in everyone's best interest, and that I was prepared to discuss the matter privately before involving external authorities. I gave him 48 hours to respond. The email went out at exactly 9:47 a.m. on Monday morning, the same time Marcus had walked through the door to fire me the previous week. Symbolic timing that I was certain he would appreciate once he realized the full scope of what he was facing. Then I waited. Marcus's response came faster than I had anticipated. By 2:15 p.m., my phone was ringing with a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, preferring to maintain control over the timing and method of our communication. His message was brief and tense, asking me to call him back immediately to discuss what he termed a misunderstanding. I didn't call back. Instead, I sent a second email with additional photographic evidence and a more detailed timeline of suspicious activities. This time, I included images of Tony Marcelli entering and leaving the coffee shop, Jennifer Morrison making unusual bank deposits, and several pages from Marcus's personal ledger showing percentage breakdowns and coded payment schedules. The subject line read, "Follow-up documentation of ongoing financial irregularities." I explained that my initial email had not been based on misunderstanding, but on systematic observation and documentation over a period of many months. I noted that the evidence suggested violations of multiple federal laws, including money laundering statutes that carried significant criminal penalties. I reiterated my willingness to discuss the matter privately, but emphasized that my patience was not unlimited. This time I gave him 24 hours. Marcus's second response revealed the desperation that was beginning to set in. 3 phone calls in rapid succession, followed by a visit to my apartment building. I watched from my window as he paced in front of the entrance, repeatedly checking his phone and looking up at the building as if he could determine which apartment was mine through sheer force of will. After an hour of surveillance, he apparently gave up and left. But his Lexus returned twice more that evening, confirming that I had successfully gotten under his skin. On Tuesday morning, I implemented the next phase of my plan. Instead of another email, I sent a physical envelope to Marcus's home address, information I'd obtained from the employment records I'd copied during my after-hours visit to the coffee shop. The envelope contained printed copies of the most damaging financial records, along with a brief note explaining that copies of all materials had been secured in multiple locations. The message was clear. This wasn't going away, and destroying the originals wouldn't solve his problem. But I also included something else in that envelope. A proposal. I offered Marcus a simple choice: voluntary resignation from his position as regional manager, along with a written confession detailing his role in the money laundering operation, or immediate delivery of all evidence to federal law enforcement agencies. I gave him 72 hours to decide. The proposal was carefully calculated to exploit Marcus's fundamental character flaw: his arrogance. He would never voluntarily confess to criminal activity, especially not to someone he considered beneath his social and professional status. But by offering him the choice, I was forcing him to reveal his true nature, while simultaneously documenting his refusal to cooperate. Wednesday morning brought the response I had expected. Marcus attempted to turn the tables, sending me a registered letter accusing me of extortion and threatening to involve law enforcement himself. His lawyer, expensive based on the letterhead, demanded that I cease all contact and turn over any materials I claimed to possess. The letter was exactly what I needed to complete my case file. Because what Marcus and his lawyer failed to understand was that I had never committed extortion. I hadn't demanded money or personal benefits. I had simply documented criminal activity and offered the perpetrator an opportunity to cooperate with inevitable law enforcement investigation. When that cooperation was refused, I was free to proceed with my civic duty to report the crimes I had discovered. Thursday morning at 8 a.m., I walked into the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office downtown, carrying 2 banker's boxes filled with organized evidence and a comprehensive written summary of everything I had discovered. The special agent who interviewed me, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Sarah Chen, reviewed my materials with growing interest and concern. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showing systematic money laundering, photographs of known criminal associates frequenting the business, recorded conversations detailing the operation, personal ledgers documenting the criminal conspiracy in Marcus Kellerman's own handwriting. But perhaps most damaging was Marcus's recent attempt to intimidate me through legal threats rather than addressing the substance of my allegations. Detective Chen noted that his behavior pattern was consistent with someone desperately trying to cover up criminal activity rather than someone falsely accused. The FBI moved quickly. By Friday afternoon, federal agents had executed search warrants at Grind Coffee House, Marcus Kellerman's residence, and Jennifer Morrison's apartment. They seized computers, financial records, and additional evidence that corroborated everything I had provided. Marcus was arrested at his home Friday evening, charged with money laundering, conspiracy, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. The local news covered the story with the breathless excitement that always accompanied white-collar crime arrests, especially when they involved seemingly respectable business owners. I watched the coverage from my apartment, sipping excellent coffee and feeling a satisfaction deeper than any I had experienced in years. The news cameras captured Marcus being led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled, his carefully styled hair disheveled, his arrogant confidence replaced by the hollow-eyed expression of someone whose world had collapsed around them. The reporter mentioned that the investigation had been triggered by a tip from a former employee who had observed suspicious activity during their time working at the coffee shop. They didn't mention my name, but they didn't need to. Marcus would know exactly who had brought down his criminal empire. Over the following weeks, the full scope of the money laundering operation became public as additional arrests were made and more evidence was revealed. Tony Marcelli, Jennifer Morrison, and 8 other individuals were charged with various crimes related to washing money for a construction company that had been overcharging the city for public works projects. The total amount laundered through Grind Coffee House over 18 months exceeded $2 million. Marcus Kellerman ultimately pleaded guilty to federal money laundering charges and was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, along with forfeiture of assets that included his house, his car, and his stake in the coffee shop business. The plea agreement revealed that he had been receiving monthly payments of $15,000 for his role in the operation. He had destroyed his life and freedom for what amounted to pocket change compared to the larger criminal enterprise. The coffee shop itself was shut down permanently, the lease terminated, and the equipment sold to satisfy federal asset forfeiture requirements. The building that had housed Grind Coffee House remained empty for months, a visible reminder of what happened when arrogance and criminal greed intersected with someone who refused to be dismissed quietly. As for me, the FBI paid a substantial reward for providing information that led to the successful prosecution of the money laundering conspiracy. The amount was enough to fund my transition to a new career, one that didn't involve making coffee for people who looked down on service workers while using those same businesses to wash their dirty money. 6 months after Marcus Kellerman's arrest, I received a letter forwarded through the federal prison system. He had apparently spent considerable time reflecting on his situation and wanted to apologize for his treatment of me. The letter was 3 pages long, detailing his remorse and asking for my forgiveness. I read it once, then fed it through my shredder. Some apologies come too late to matter, and some people learn about consequences only after they've lost everything they thought made them untouchable. On the first anniversary of my termination from Grind Coffee House, I drove past the empty building that had once been the scene of Marcus Kellerman's criminal enterprise. The For Lease sign had been up so long that weather had begun to fade the printing, and weeds were growing through cracks in the parking lot. I parked across the street, in the same spot where I had conducted surveillance and gathered the evidence that brought down the money laundering operation. The bookstore was still there, still serving as an inadvertent observation post for anyone with the patience and motivation to watch and wait. As I sat in my car sipping coffee from a thermos, still better than anything Grind had ever served, I reflected on the chain of events that had begun with Marcus Kellerman pointing his manicured finger toward the exit door and ended with him wearing federal prison clothing. He had fired me for being rude to customers while personally profiting from criminal activity that harmed the entire community. The irony would have been poetic if the consequences hadn't been so real, so devastating to everyone involved in the conspiracy. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the entire experience was knowing that Marcus would spend the next several years in federal prison with plenty of time to consider the wisdom of dismissing people without understanding who they really were or what they were capable of when pushed too far. Justice, like good coffee, was best served with patience, precision, and attention to detail. And sometimes, when everything came together perfectly, the final result was more satisfying than anyone could have imagined. I finished my coffee, started the engine, and drove away from the empty building, leaving the past where it belonged and moving forward with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly what you're capable of when someone makes the mistake of underestimating you. Marcus Kellerman had learned that lesson the hard way, and somewhere in a federal prison cell, he was still learning it every single day.